In today's video, we go to Eldon Lane. It isn't the kind of place that makes headlines, it's the kind that collects them, quietly, one bad story at a time. The houses are cheap, the temper shorter, and the sense of consequence almost extinct. By the time anyone realised how deep the grudges ran, the line between survival and revenge had already vanished. And one night, a grudge would boil over into murder. This is Curios&Spiritual. We take a look at the case, the police investigation, and the trial. We go to Eldon Lane, County Durham, a village that has its problems with poverty and unemployment. If you wanted to understand how modern tragedy starts, don't look to grand betrayals or cinematic villains. Look instead to petty grudges, stupid grudges, immature pride, and the kind of adolescence bravado that convinces a teenager he can rewrite the past with fists and threats. The seeds of this disaster were planted in August 2022. Picture it, Jack Lawson, still young enough to be doing GCSEs, but old enough to think he ruled the postcode. Standing apart beside him, his mate Marley Rolls. Across from them, 18-year-old Jack Richardson and his entourage. The sort of local gang that believes hierarchy is measured in volume. A fight had been arranged because, of course it had. Conflict in County Durham doesn't die. It simply books a rematch because there's naff all else to do. Marley Rolls, practical if not inspired, handed Lawson some gold rings to keep safe during the scuffle. Lawson stuffed them into a bag, which promptly became the night's most coveted object. Jack Richardson, who had come to the local park, supported by 3 others, in a display of confidence that would later prove catastrophic. Richardson, backed by 2 of his associates, took the bag containing the rings from Lawson and walked away. They robbed him of it. They snatched it and walked off with the loot. Lawson, aggrieved and ringless, did the sensible thing for about half a day. He called the police. And then what you might think is the most British anticlimax in recent memory, everyone agreed to quietly drop it. His father would later say they decided not to press charges. It was agreed between the police, Jack, and the father that it was better not to make a statement because of the potential repercussions. In translation, that means better an unresolved theft than an ongoing feud. Shocking move by the police there, but these days it's expected. And so peace was restored, technically. The problem, as it turned out, was that Jack Lawson was a connoisseur of grudges. He told himself and anyone who'd listen that he moved on, but inside he was cataloguing the insult. Why? Because Richardson was apparently boasting about it. Nothing inflames humiliation like hearing your thief brag about being your thief. So the ember glowed on, faint but steady. 2 years passed, school ended, people grew up, a bit. But resentment doesn't tend to follow you if you can't let it go. It just waits and gets you when there's nothing better going on in your life. A lingering resentment at Jack Richardson's behaviour, he was going on boasting of how he had robbed. On at least 2 subsequent occasions when Jack Lawson saw him, Jack himself would later admit hatred. One incident was at McDonald's in Bishop Auckland, a few months before the night of the 13th of December 2024. The other was at Tesco car park at about 10 PM on the 13th of December. Jack Lawson was parked up in his white Ford Focus, and by chance, Jack Richardson arrived and parked nearby in his red Ford Focus. There was some discussion between one of the 2 female passengers, each aged 16, and Jack Richardson. Jack Lawson tried to reach for a so-called African stick, which he kept in the back footwell of his car, but the rear seat female passenger sensibly put her foot on it to prevent Jack Lawson taking it. Lawson and Richardson left in their cars, but Lawson then returned to Tesco at the request of one of his young passengers. Minutes later, his friend Marley Rolls arrived in his Peugeot van with 2 passengers. Harry Brown and another. These 3 were respectively aged 20, 18 and 16. A knife was passed from the van to the glove box of Lawson's car. After leaving from Tesco at about 10:30 PM, there followed a series of events which included Jack Lawson and Jack Richardson driving around in their respective cars and goading each other to having a fist fight. to take place at a variety of suggested locations, including the open land at Old Lines. This included a short meeting at Old Lines, followed by a high-speed car chase of several minutes through the streets and a heated mobile phone conversation between the two, Lawson and Richardson. On various occasions, Lawson made aggressively violent remarks about Jack Richardson in the course of messages to his mates on Snapchat. The female passengers were younger than Lawson, but were a hell of a lot more mature. They pleaded with Jack Lawson to calm down and forget the matter. It wasn't all manic, there was calmer periods that night, notably when Lawson collected a number of their female friends from various places. By 12:10 that night, which rolled into December the 14th, Jack Lawson had dropped off all the female passengers. He then made contact with his friend Connor Vint, aged 18 years old, and joined up with him. By about 1 a.m, Lawson ultimately arranged with Richardson to meet up at Old Lines for the intended fight. His next visit to Old Lines was on foot, but no contact was made with Richardson. The open land at Old Line is reached from the high street, Eldon Lane, by a short road called Millbank Terrace. At about 2:27 a.m, Jack Lawson arrived there in his white Ford Focus, with Marley Rose, Harry Brown as passengers. They were followed by Connor Vint driving a Vauxhall Astra and his 16-year-old passenger. At 2:33 a.m, CCTV captured the two cars then driving back down Millbank Terrace, away from Old Lines. Just over 1 minute later, at 2:34, Jack Lawson took a video of a knife which was in his lap as he drove along. This is another knife he had in the car. Just before the time of that video, Lawson asked his passengers if they had anything in case they needed to defend themselves, and that Harry Brown gave you the knife. This was emphatically denied by Harry Brown. At 2:37 a.m, CCTV shows the Astra returning back up Millbank Terrace, and the evidence was that the white Focus returned at about the same time. The two vehicles parked up at the Old Lines at 2:44 a.m. The red Ford Focus drove up Millbank Terrace towards Jack Lawson's position. In the car were Jack Richardson, Craig York and Jordan Hodgson. Craig York and Jordan Hodgson were each aged 28, and Jack Lawson did not know either of them. Jordan Hodgson had previous convictions for 7 offences of violence, 2 offences of public disorder, and 3 offences involving weapons. Craig York had convictions for 2 offences of violence and 3 offences of public disorder. Jack Richardson had no previous convictions. Although CCTV shows movements up and down Millbank Terrace, it did not extend to the site of the incident on open land. However, the CCTV provided some audio record of the incident. There was a collision between the red Focus and the Vauxhall Astra. At least 2 hooded occupants of the red Ford Focus got out. Lawson was in the driving seat of his white Ford Focus with the knife in his lap. On Jack Lawson's own account, he's seen the two hitting the Vauxhall Astra and trying to hit his passenger with an African stick. Jack Lawson got out the car with the knife in his right hand and went over to try and scare them off. One of them ran away. The other, Craig York, came towards Lawson. He started trying to hit Lawson with his stick. Jack Lawson then stabbed him 3 times, once below the armpit, to the chest and to the right groin. When Lawson stopped, York pushed back, turned around and started running towards the adjacent field. That run is caught on CCTV in Millbank Terrace. Craig York collapsed and died outside the nearby home of his cousin Trevor Thompson. Despite the efforts of his son and his neighbour in giving CPR, and subsequently from ambulance paramedics, Craig York was pronounced dead at 3:38 a.m. The morning after the incident on Eldon Lane, Durham Constabulary was suddenly thrust into a kind of situation that keeps murder detectives awake at night. A murder with all the trappings of teenage foolishness, grudges and pull-it-on bravado. Police began securing the scene and gathering the first facts and evidence. Police arrived promptly, finding Craig York fatally injured. Emergency services did what they could, but the man was beyond saving. It's one of those facts that sound like a line from procedural drama, but in reality, it's delivered with heavy pragmatism. The area was quickly sealed, witnesses identified, and forensic teams called in. officers had to perform the classic juggling act of controlling the crowd, preserve the evidence, and keep teenagers from wandering into the cordon. A major breakthrough came not from a single eyewitness, but from the background, the simmering feud between Lawson and Jack Richardson. Publicly documented, this grudge dated back to August 2022, when Richardson, aided by 2 or 3 associates, had robbed a bag containing gold rings entrusted to Lawson by his friend Marley Rolls. And here's where modern policing really shines. Digital breadcrumbs. Mobile phones are the gift that keeps on giving, and in this case they were invaluable. Investigators recovered call logs, messages and social media communications that revealed the planning of a meeting at Eldon Lane. This wasn't spontaneous teenage bravado, it was a coordinated rendezvous. Officers also collected CCTV footage from nearby streets. Once the evidence was gathered, the investigation moved towards action. Jack Lawson was arrested and charged with murder. The arrest was a culmination of weeks of interviews, evidence processing and corroboration. Lawson initially claimed self-defence, but collected evidence suggested premeditation and excessive force. Investigators prepared a file meticulously, every witness statement, digital trace and forensic result catalogued for the prosecution. Video stored on Jack Lawson's phone showed him the immediate aftermath of the stabbing, holding a blood-stained knife and an African walking stick, and a further image of a blood-stained knife in his lap a couple of minutes later as he drove away in the white Ford Focus. Lawson said he took the videos to show they had run away from him and to show off, and he said he didn't realise at this point that Craig York, the victim, was seriously injured. Having met up with the others and abandoned the Vauxhall Astra, Lawson drove them all in his white Ford Focus. During the course of the journey, he threw away the knife. In the police interview, Lawson denied any involvement in the matter. After being charged on the 1st of May 2025, Lawson pleaded guilty to manslaughter, but denied intent for murder. The courtroom is where the adolescent's bravado meets adult scrutiny, and the Teesside Crown Court became the stage for this collision. The prosecution presented a straightforward narrative: the lingering grudge from 2022, the premeditated December the 13th meeting 2 years later, the presence of a knife and a fatal outcome. Witnesses including friends, bystanders, forensic experts and police officers testimony confirmed the planning, the sequence of events, the presence of a knife. Jack Richardson, notably, was never called to testify, a decision that subtly highlighted legal strategy without altering the weight of evidence. Digital evidence dominated discussions. Call logs, messages and social media interactions detailed the arrangement of the confrontation. The prosecution highlighted these as indicators of premeditation. The defence attempted to contextualise them as teenage posturing, but the combination of physical evidence and witness testimony rendered the argument less persuasive. The outcome? The judge read out the sentence. Jack Lawson, as the law requires, the sentence which I impose on you is one of detention during His Majesty's pleasure. You have been found guilty of murder. I turn to the minimum sentence which you must serve in custody before you may apply to parole board to be considered for release. Having regard to all the matters to which I referred, I set the minimum term at 18 years, less the 295 days you have spent on remand in custody. The minimum term is to be served is therefore 17 years and 70 days. 3 men and 1 boy were acquitted of all charges. The trial sparked community reflection. Local media coverage prompted discussions about youth violence, knife crime, and the consequences of unresolved disputes. Schools, families, and local organisations considered strategies for prevention, highlighting the broader social implications of individual actions. Eldon Lane has figured in the news before, and it's now been a dumping ground for refugees in a place that's poor and has stretched public services. A community that feels it's been abandoned by government, by opportunity, by hope. Eldon Lane is the kind of place where poverty is a backdrop, where petty squabbles become blown up. In the end, nobody really wins. The courtroom lights go out, the police files are boxed up, and the headlines fade beneath new tragedies. Young men who thought they were settling a score instead rewrote their lives. For every boast, every threat, every night spent replaying the insult that started it all, there's now a silence that won't be broken. Justice, such as it is, doesn't resurrect the dead or absolve the living. It just keeps the paperwork neat. The system grinds on, precise, indifferent, a grudge that ended up in murder of a man he wasn't even angry with. Because that's the darkest truth of all. Monsters aren't born in alleyways or nightmares. They're built, slowly, out of pride, resentment. There are many in prison serving life sentences for something they could have just walked away from, but didn't at the time, with the certainty that they were right up until the sirens start. The rest of us watch, shake our heads, and pretend we'd never make them same stupid choices under the same stupid stars.